Good morning, students, and welcome to today's video lecture on Indian political system. The subtopic that we will be engaging with today is the religion, communalism, and regionalism. In this lesson, we will be looking at how the politics and religion interact with each other and how it leads to politicization of caste and spread of communalism. And all this would be talked about in the context of India. We will also try and understand the concept of regionalism and its future prospects. Now, you have to understand that India is a multi-religious country. India is a country of all religions, and Indian population has 82.64% Hindus, 15.35% Muslims, 2.43% of Christians in its population, 2% are Sikhs, 0.71% are Buddhists, and 0.48% are Jains. 0.3% are Parsis and 0.1% are Jews. These figures were told to you just to make you understand how diverse we are and how many religions we have and what are their compositions and how significant number of people every religion has. Looking at this multi-religious composition of India, the maker of India's constitution enshrined secularism as the foundation of India's political system. They believed that this would help keeping religion away from politics. Secularism is one of the most powerful instruments to build a modern secular polity. Under the principle of secularism, the religious interests of all the religious communities in our country are fully protected and safeguarded. Despite taking so many precautions, we still witness around us so many communal tensions, and religion becoming a part of Indian politics has become even more a challenge for the country to deal with. Let's look into the relationship between religion and politics in more detail. Religion has a very powerful and emotional appeal, which is sometimes used by the politicians to get people's votes. Each religion, may it be Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, or Sikhism, they are strong communities with very distinct characters. Every religious community has a very distinct history altogether. And it is also noticed that the members of a religion have common socio-economic, political, and even cultural interests, apart from having their common religious beliefs. So most of the times you'll find people of same religion having a similar kind of profession or a similar kind of economic status in a particular region. You will also find them having their social values very similar. You will also find them eating the similar kind of food. So their food habits will vary. For example, they might not, even if they're non-vegetarians, they might not eat a particular kind of non-vegetarian food because their religion doesn't allow them to. So there are a lot of similarities in the people who belong to a same religion. Religious communities have been seen as forming the basic unit of the political activities in India. The people who are the ardent followers of a religion, they support the political party which comprises candidates from their own religion. Religious distinctions and religious identity is supreme, and it overrides the other distinctions like nationality or language. People feel very comfortable and they feel quite at peace when they're surrounded by the people who are from the same religion. More than often, it has been noticed that different religious groups look at each other with the eyes of suspicion and consider their interests to be different. Now, this can be a natural process. Either a person can feel this naturally. If it doesn't come naturally, sometimes the political players feed this kind of feeling in the people that their interests are different from the other people just because the religion are different from the other people. So, from India's past experiences, we can say that if religion divides are the religious divide, if the religious divides are not concealed, if we do not try and resolve these differences in time, it can lead to some drastic outcomes, like we saw at the time of India's partition, when Pakistan was demanded on the grounds that Muslim identity needs a safer country for the preservance and practice of their culture. There we see that religion can act as a divisive force, so divisive that it can divide a country into two parts. Communalism is giving, now we'll be moving to the next topic. Actually, now we'll actually be studying about this relationship of religion and how religion and politics, and how keeping religion above everything and having ultra religious ideas, what impact do they have on our economy and our society. We'll be looking at it now. So, communalism is giving religious color to a particular situation when a situation is looked through the lenses of religion. When a normal event is looked from the eyes of religion, it is called communalism. So, it is giving religious color to every situation and event. When religion stands above everything and people are ready to take action to preserve and protect their religion, when they feel it is in danger, that is called communalism. Interaction between religion and politics has led to politicization of religion and communalization of politics. That is, mixing of religion, God, and belief with politics. Now, Indian communalism takes two distinct political forms. So there are two ways in which communalism is pictured in India. The first is the communal politics, and the second is the communal tension. Focusing on the communal politics first, it means actively using religion in the political domains. Now, this kind of communal politics is carried out by the political parties and organizations which represent communal ideologies. Introducing communal element in the politics is not a matter of one day or a month. So to introduce religion into politics, to start making people believe that religion is an important part of politics, is something that requires a lot of brainwash. It requires a lot of effort for a long number of years, and it cannot be done in just a day or a few days or a few months. It takes a long period of time, and this is a continuous process. This thought has to be continuously fed every now and then. Now, the actor in the communal politics are drawn from all walks of life, and from the bureaucratic elements, from middle classes, from lower classes, and from the other sections of society. Everybody gets involved in this kind of politics. Communal politics and communal tensions are contemporary to each other. They're complementing each other. Communal riots can occur from a communal political scenario, and some political actors, they try to instigate the acts of communal violence and unrest. Communal politics can only be successful if the masses are involved in it. Communal organizations like Muslim League, Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, Hindu Mahasabha, all have a mass following, and these organizations are in some or the other way either a political party or they have some kind of political affiliations. So politics is somehow involved in these religious organizations. Communal politics is usually against the national interest and certainly against the principle of secularism, because in a secular state, we will understand this concept later in these slides and in this video. Secularism means when state doesn't involve itself in the matters of religion and doesn't follow any religion. So a political party talking about religion and promising to promote a particular religion is absolutely against the principle of secularism, and India is a secular country. Looking at the second element of communalism, we'll be talking about the communal politics, the communal tensions in India because of the communal politics. Communal tensions mean a violent expression of one's religious sentiments. Communal tensions are often sparked from petty things like playing of loudspeaker in the temples and mosques. So you need to understand that communal tensions do not require a very big issue at hand to fight for. Communal tensions are an expression of communal politics. So, when there is a continuous practice of communal politics, when politicians and other political actors feed these feelings of communal hatred between two communities, then there's frustration and there's a lot of build up anger against each other for no particular reason. So, a slight incident, a small incident sparks this tension, and it leads to emotional outbursts. It might lead to violence, it leads to riots. And outbursts of such tensions are seen as a result of communal politics, which arouse these communal passions through vicious propagandas, and rumors are also used to do this. We all know how much damage the fake news has done to our society and what a nuisance it has become. So just because certain people are wearing certain kinds of clothes and passing from a certain kind of area, because of the rumors and fake news, they are being lynched, because they are being associated with a particular religion. It's a huge problem. Communal tensions have not been long lived in India. They are isolated, specific incidences which do not last long. So, communal tensions are incidences which happen at a particular geographical location because of the immediate tensions that were sparked. India is otherwise a peaceful country. We do not have long lived communal tensions and violence altogether. The situation comes in control with the intervention of the government authorities and the society. Normalcy is restored as soon as possible. But such isolated incidents, they lead to intercommunal discords and systematically exploit the religious sentiments of people. So even if a person is sitting in a completely different part of the country, but he watches such news on the television, it does somewhere instigate some hatred into him towards the opposite religion in the riot. Let's look at the factors that are responsible for promoting communalism in a society. So, first is the historical policies that were introduced in India by the British government, which was the divide and the rule policy. British officials, they designed the policies that encouraged the feeling of hatred between religions, especially Hindus and Muslims, because these were the two dominant religions in India at that time. Scars of these policies and its effects are visible and have strained the relationship between Hindus and Muslims, and we can clearly see that strain even today. Second factor is the use of religion by a few to fulfill their own political objectives. Religion acts as a very powerful tool in the hands of people with vested interests and resources. At this point, it is very important to understand the difference between religious violence and communal violence. Now, religious violence is different from communal violence, and we'll see the difference now. Religious violence, it occurs when two religious communities have different fundamental opinions and they cannot coexist. So, religious violence is something which comes out naturally when two people or two communities are living together and they have very different fundamental values and they do not agree on their fundamentals in life. But on the other hand, communal violence occurs due to the conflicts over controlling the political power and national resources. So, when this tension between two communities is taken advantage of by some political actor and politics gets involved into it, that is when we call this kind of violence as communal violence. So if there's no involvement of politics, then it is religious violence. If there is involvement of politics, then it is communal violence. Please remember this difference. Underdeveloped economy can also attribute to some communal tensions. It leads to uneven development of the communities. The people who belong to less privileged communities often get exploited by the political agents who want to spread communal feelings. and their grievances, their problems are used by this section of political class. These sentiments are escalated even more by manipulating the mythological versions, and people easily fall for it. It's very easy for people to fall for such ideas and ideologies because these people have a very different psychology. You have to understand that they are from a place which is underdeveloped. They don't have opportunities. They do not have enough growth prospects in future. So they have lost hope. So when they lose hope, they find solace in all these kind of religious assurances that are given by the political parties. The next factor is social structures. Organizations like RSS have been following the principles of religious beliefs, and they are openly affiliated to a particular religion. And very surprisingly, they have following from even the upper class and the educated classes in the society, and the religious sentiments of these followers is successfully exploited by the communal elites. The faith in some organizations is so strong that people tend to blindly follow it and its instructions. Anything of any instruction that comes from such social structures is not looked through the logic or reasons point of view at all. This helps the communal elements take advantage and develop an authoritarian kind of structure. So, why am I using the word authoritarian kind of a structure? Because your belief in an organization is so strong that you do not question whatever that organization says. You just agree to it. Socioeconomic changes in the society bring deep sense of insecurity amongst some stratas and classes in the society. They get negatively affected by these changes. So if there are certain changes which are being brought up about in the society, and a particular class is being negatively affected by that change, or they do not want to adapt themselves to this change, and they want to oppose this change, so they then start feeling neglected, and there's a deep sense of insecurity. The people who are in the lower income group get most affected in most of these cases, and then these unsatisfied people, they fall for the misleading promises that the political classes and some politicians have to make, and politicians use this situation and they manipulate these people. These changes are brought to develop the society, but on the contrary, a sense of insecurity is generated which increases the appeal of religion by providing solace and reducing psychological tensions. At this point, we should also look at the religious fundamentalism. Such fundamental movements are a result of rising ambitions of political actors to gain the political goals. For example, the Vishwa Hindu Parishad published several pamphlets in various languages and even painted the wall slogans in most of the towns and cities to promote militant nationalism. The equally virulent communalism of Muslim brand was also witnessed on the issues of maintenance to divorce. When the Muslim women were given certain rights during the divorce at that particular time, during the Rajiv Gandhi government, we saw huge crowds opposing the kind of decision that a Supreme Court took, and thereby raising the issue of inviolability of sacred Shariat civil code of Muslims. So whenever a change is brought in the religious laws for the betterment of the society, for the betterment of the women, or in general for the development of that community, it is seen by certain sections of that community as an attack on their cultural and their religious rights, which is not right. Certain changes need to be brought about with time in the society, which are important. The next factor that leads to adding some communal touch in Indian politics is the regional organizations. Now, these are more often the regional political parties, and assertion of one's regional or communal. So now we need to understand what do we actually mean by regionalism. So assertion, when somebody asserts its identity to a particular region, it is a result of now why do somebody assert their identity on a particular region? It can be a result of a conflict over sharing of economic resources, maybe. And this conflict is bound to be amongst different sections of the society. And it is very easy to label the opposing groups into two different religions at this point. And thus, a religious angle can be given to this dispute. So, the rising aspirations amongst the youth of this country and the country's limited resources have fueled the problem of regionalism further, because we know all the regions are not equally developed, and the people who live in the regions which are less developed, which give them less number of opportunities, those regions and people living in those regions are unsatisfied, and it brings a kind of enmity between them and the people of regions which are more developed. And this enmity is sometimes manipulated to be seen as regional fight between these two groups. So politicians, some political actors, I'm not saying all the politicians and all the political actors, but some of them, to fulfill their own agendas, do take advantage of such conflicts and label them as religious conflicts. So we need to be aware about this and take care that we do not fall prey to all these things. The next factor is the attitude of the political parties. Political parties have an ideology which is framed keeping in mind the people's need and the people's aspirations whose vote these political parties want to seek. And this ideology, it attracts the voters towards these political parties. And in order to gain more support and more votes and to appeal the voters, the parties are seen taking the help of religion very often. They influence the masses by communal politics to fulfill their own political motives. Periodical elections, which are a fundamental feature of a representative democracy, encourage the political elites of the two communities to try and mobilize as many voters as possible by appealing to their respective communal identities. Now, the Mandir Masjid controversy is a classic example in India. The presence of the anti-social elements like the involvement of underworld and criminals in funding the politics or the use of muscle power in the election also plays a prominent role in the communal riots. Involvement of goons and unethical people in the politics just adds to the corruption and contributes to the communal riots. Moving on, let's discuss the effects that these communal riots and communalism has on the society. One thing is very clear by now, that communalism is anti-national and anti-human. The various forms of communalism that prevail today are extremely dangerous for India, and it doesn't allow different communities to coexist peacefully. So for India, as we know that India is a multi-religious and a multilingual fraternity, it is an insult to its national identity and proved to be very destructive for our democratic political systems. And it would lead to ruining the secular fabric of this country. It also poses great threat to our national security. Trying to find out some solutions to this problem, let's discuss the measures to combat communalism. The first thing is required is to reawaken the citizens of India on the issues of national unity, integrity, and secularism. It is very important to de-recognize the political parties which fight the elections on the communal grounds and promote hatred. As a citizen of India, it is our fundamental duty to promote harmony and fraternity amongst our fellow Indians. Thus, anyone found guilty of neglecting these ideas and these principles and participating in any form of communal violence or tensions should be very strictly punished by law to set an example for others to not do the same. The values of national fraternity, India's composite culture, and humanity and humanist principles should be promoted through educational institutions, through workplaces, and through the community centers. Media and journalists should also act very, very responsibly, and they should not cover any news that has potential to disturb the communal harmony in the society. Following the principles of secularism can help build unity in India. It is one of the basic principles of the Constitution. And it is also one of the most powerful tools to build the modern secular politics in this multilinguistic and multi-religious community. The concept of secularism has following fundamental ideas. It means giving religious freedom to all the people in the community, equal respect for all the religions. It also means no state religion. The country will not have any official religion at all. No special privileges will be given to any of the religions existing in the country. True secularism can only be achieved when the political class follows the principle of secularism. When the politics is divorced from all the religious individuals, groups, and parties, when there would be a common civil law, when the state will not interfere in the personal religious faiths of the citizens unreasonably, when the spirit of inquiry and scientific temper are of paramount importance, that is the time when the secularism can be achieved. Coming on to our next topic, let us look at some constitutional provisions in India that make sure that it is a secular country in true sense. So our constitution makers had in writing assured through the constitution that India had a good number of provisions which ensure that it is a secular country if all these provisions are followed. The very introduction to our constitution, which is given by the preamble. So the preamble itself contains the word secular. There is no provision in the Constitution which declares any religion as the state religion. The following articles in the constitutions very clearly reaffirm the secular characteristics in India and its constitution. First is Article 25 with the right to freedom of religion, Article 26 the right to manage the religious affairs. Article 27 is the right to freedom as to the payment of taxes for the protection of any particular religion. So no person in India, what does Article 27 mean is that no person in India can be forced to pay any tax for one particular religion. Just because you're a Hindu, for example, if you're a Hindu or you're a Muslim, you cannot be forced to pay the tax for the development of the Muslim community. So religion cannot be a ground for you to pay the tax. Nobody can force you. Article 29 guarantees the right to protect the interest of minorities. Article 28, it gives you the right to freedom of worship. Article 29, as I said, guarantees the right to protect the interest of minorities, and the right of minorities to establish and administer their own educational institutions is given by Article 30. There are many more such provisions in the constitutions. As you all know, there's paucity of time. We cannot stretch this lecture beyond a certain time limit. So I am not touching on all the articles. It's not practically possible, but you can find them out. Moving on to our next topic, that is regionalism. Region is a geographical term. It is an area with some common religious features, some other common features amongst people who are staying there. The common factors may be caste, maybe language, maybe their religion, or any other factor which they have in common. For example, Punjab is a region which has a common language called Punjabi. People staying in the Punjab will have a distinct culture. They have a distinct form of dancing. They have distinct form of food. Their clothing style varies. And in the past, most of the people were also engaged in agriculture. Even today, most of the people are engaged in agriculture. But sometime before, there was absolutely no other profession apart from agriculture and allied activities that dominated Punjab. Regions can be divided on various bases, like there can be administrative regions, there can be economic zones or political regions or geographical regions. And out of these administrative regions are created deliberately for the administrative convenience of the government of a country. In India, we have a hierarchy of administrative regions. At the bottom is the village. Few villages together form taluka. Talukas, they together form districts, and districts form divisions, which in turn form the states, and the union of state forms India. Maharashtra, for example, is divided into 6 administrative divisions, and every district in Maharashtra has a collector. So before we get into the details, like what the regionalism is and how it affects our social fabric, our secular fabric, First, let's look at the background of the regionalism in India. So, India was never a unified nation, as we all know, before the Britishers arrived. Before the British rule, it was divided amongst the small princely states and kingdoms since the ancient times. In 1947, immediately before independence, there were about 563 princely states in the country. And under the British rule, all these regions were brought under the Unified Administrative Authority, that was the British East India Company and later the British government. They created provinces and presidencies like Madras presidencies and Bombay presidency, and there were conflicts and clashes amongst various communities who were forcefully put together under one presidency or one province because they did not have anything in common and they were forcefully being put together under the one state. This conflict became the foundation of demand for a separate and a smaller state. These demands they started arising during the British rule itself. After a long struggle, the British government did agree to give some separate provinces like Assam, Bihar, and Orissa by dividing the Bengal presidency. Delhi was also separated from Punjab, but most of the demands were neglected and they were not fulfilled. The demand for forming separate states continued throughout the freedom struggle. Mahatma Gandhi himself became the first prominent political leader to pitch this demand and say that yes, language should be one basis to divide this country into different states. This will ensure unity. That was Gandhiji. That is what Gandhiji thought. And in 1920, the Indian National Congress, in its Nagpur session, also declared its motive, its own objective to divide this country into various states depending on the language only post independence, if it comes to power and if India achieves complete independence. But after independence, Congress was shaken by the incident of partition that India had to see. It did not want to divide the country further on the basis of language, as it feared that this division will hurt the unity and fraternity of this country, which has already seen a bloody partition. There was a lot of bloodshed in the partition. But it seemed that people were not impressed by the idea of Congress and they kept demanding for separate states. Even the regional Congress leaders were making some demands, to have separate states. So they were also making same demands as the rest of the people. Finally, the Dhar Commission was appointed to look into the matter. In its report, Dhar Commission opposed the idea of having separate state based on the language. So Dhar Commission, it kind of had similar views of that of Congress. Again, JVP Commission was set up. So JVP Commission had Jawaharlal Nehru as one of the members, and it also gave a similar conclusion that the country shouldn't be divided. Now, Congress at this point even sent out notices to its own regional political arms and its own regional units, warning them against participating in any such demand for a separate statehood. And most of the Congress leaders, they did agree to these notices. They bound themselves by these notices and they took a step back. But an isolated incident in Andhra changed the entire political scene in the country forever. A Gandhian, Poti Sriramulu, died on the 58th day of his fast unto death. He was fasting to demand a separate state of Andhra Pradesh for Telugu-speaking people. Now, his death caused uncontrollable violence in the region. The violence went so out of hand that Nehru had to himself come to Hyderabad and declare the creation of Andhra Pradesh to settle things down. Now, Andhra Pradesh became a separate state. So later, looking at Andhra Pradesh's creation, people across the country, they became even more excited and they became hopeful that if Andhra is able to become a separate state because of people's agitation, that why can't we do it? So the demand for forming separate states, it escalated throughout the country. So another commission was set up. This commission was called the Fazl Ali Commission, and it's also popularly called the State Reorganization Commission. So after the report came out, on its recommendations, many new states were created, but still the problem of bilingual Bombay state and Punjab province remained. It was solved later in 1960 when Maharashtra and Gujarat were created, and in 1966, separate state of Punjab was created. In 1975, Sikkim, which was under the British protection until now, came to be the part of India. Union territory of Goa was converted into a separate state in 1987. You can check out the detailed tables and detailed graphs and all the factual information in the study material that is available with you. It will be more handy for you. You do not need to learn each and every year and each and every time a state was formed. You do not need to cram the facts. But for reference, it is great if you can read those tables available in your book. The latest to be carved out was Telangana, and the Constitution of India very clearly divides the powers between the center and the state. Okay, so we need to understand what is this relationship between the center and the state. Now, the areas of jurisdiction are mentioned in three lists. The first is referred to as the union list, the second is referred to as the state list, and the third is referred to as concurrent list. So there are three lists, and I will not be talking about this in detail because we have a separate video lecture available on the same platform. You can find it here, which talks extensively and exhaustively about the center-state relationship. So you'll find this topic in detail over there. Okay, please check that video out if need be. So this arrangement gives us an idea. So we're talking about the three lists. This arrangement gives us an idea that the makers of Indian Constitution, they respected the autonomy of the states. Therefore, if today regional aspirations are rising, it should not bother the country as long as these aspirations, they do not harm the national security and the unity of the country. In a country as vast as India and which is so diverse, all aspects of the regional parties or institutions give voice to the regional problems and needs. This is why, with the passage of years, the multifaceted aspirations, which together may be described as regionalism, have gained strength. But regionalism does not always have a very positive connotation in our society. It might even be perceived very negatively when it is talked in context of nationalism. So why can we take it in a negative sense sometimes? This is because the regionalism means promotion of interest of a part of country instead of promoting the interest of the whole country altogether. But in principle, regionalism should not be viewed as an anti-national kind of phenomena unless it takes a very aggressive or militant turn. For example, national unity is not in danger if a region has a genuine pride in its own language or culture. But if the political class starts using these regional sentiments for their own political benefits, yes, then it can be very dangerous. So basically, there is nothing contradictory about, these two things. Nationalism and regionalism are not contrary unless deliberate efforts are made by some actors to use regionalism as a tool in politics. Regionalism has a very, very close relationship. We need to understand this. It has a very close relationship with the level of development in a community. So the imbalanced regional growth leads to people getting unequal opportunity, and this leads to dissatisfaction. The people, they start migrating from one area to another area. So from less developed area, they start going to the more developed one to find maybe the employment opportunities, better educational opportunities, or any other form of better lifestyles, maybe any other form of opportunity. So now this migration, it causes the problem of regional identities. It gives rise to regional chauvinism. What is regional chauvinism? Now, it means when the locals, they start developing a feeling of insecurity and they have a feeling of some kind of insecurity by looking at the migrants. They feel that they have to share their resources, they have to share their space, they have it is there. All these job opportunities could be theirs, but now if the migrants have come, they have to share these opportunities with these people also. So this becomes a very insecure kind of an environment, which leads to a feeling of hatred between the local classes and the migrated classes. This problem can be solved with proper planning and the proper development. So we have a case study, a very interesting and a very successful one, the NCR, the National Capital Region. We see that as the capital city of Delhi, it started attracting a lot of migrants from all over the country, particularly from the neighbors like Bihar, UP, Haryana, and Rajasthan, Punjab, and Madhya Pradesh. In 1990s were the years when Delhi started becoming extremely congested. To solve this problem, immediate actions were taken, many new measures were adopted. A national capital region surrounding Delhi was created. It included the districts from the adjoining states. Now, mass transportation system like metro system and local railway trains were introduced to facilitate smooth transit between the suburban areas and the city. Center also plans to create counter magnets to reduce the rush of migrants coming to Delhi. What are counter magnets now? Counter magnets are cities which will attract the flow of migrants which at present are coming to Delhi. So cities which are nearby Delhi can be developed to the level of development that Delhi has, so that people, instead of going to Delhi, go to these magnet cities and Delhi becomes less congested. For example, Gwalior is considered to be a magnet city for counter magnet city for Delhi. Moving on to the next topic, that is the regional parties and the demand for regional for different states. So we've already discussed this, the demand for separate states. So we'll be going to the regional parties now, okay? Regionalism gives rise to the regional political parties who claim to represent the interest of a particular region. We have already discussed what a regional political party is. It is a party that has its roots in a particular region, and it at least claims to be a well-wisher of that region and the people of that region, and it plans to give voice to the people of that region. India, post the collapse of Congress dominance in 1996, is seen a rise in the regional parties. Almost all the states have regional parties now, and regional parties have become very important to form government at the center also. So at center, you will see that there are coalition governments now, always needing the support of some or the other regional parties to complete the number they want to come into majority. So besides the registered and the recognized parties, there are also 1,534 registered unrecognized parties listed by the Election Commission of India. Such a long list, it clearly indicates the need for the recognition and separate identity that is felt by the people. If there are so many regional parties that exist, it means definitely there are issues which are not addressed by the national parties, and that is why people are supporting these regional parties. Now, regionalism should not be confused with secessionism. There's a huge difference. Regionalism is, I'll tell you, it is more about taking pride in your own different characteristics that you have because you live in a particular region. For example, if I'm a Punjabi, if I take pride in speaking Punjabi language, there is no harm in it. If I take pride in the kind of food I eat, there's no harm in it, right? But secessionism is a demand to create a separate country where you do not wish to stay in a particular country. So if tomorrow Punjabis do not want to stay, some Punjabis do not want to be a part of India anymore, and they start demanding a separate state for Punjab, separate country for Punjabis, that would be a problem. That would be highly dangerous for a unified country like India. That demand is called secessionism. When you want to break away from the country and want to declare your region as a separate country. Okay, so ultra-regional feelings like having a separate country, it's always dangerous. So we have seen such movements in India. One was the Khalistani movement in Punjab, the separatist movement in Kashmir Valley. They adopt unconstitutional means to put forward their demands, use violence in such movements, and this disturbs the harmony of the society completely. It even hampers the development of those areas. We can see Jammu and Kashmir, how much it has suffered since so many years and how much it has lagged in the developmental activities. A lot of these movements actually they do not enjoy a lot of mass support. There are some notorious political elements who fuel these movements. There are some criminals, there are some terrorist organizations that we found to be involved in such movements who have their own vested interests. So we need to be very careful, and it is an appeal to all the youth to not fall prey to such movements, to not fall prey to such promises and some such illusions, which only have a very narrow perspective in mind. So with this, we complete this chapter. I hope I was able to make most of the topics clear to you. So if you have any problem, please go through these videos again. Do give the feedback to the university. We'll definitely have a follow-up session if required. Thank you so much and all the very best.